Hey everybody, welcome back to another Sunday special. I'm always super excited to do these because what I do every Sunday is I go through a list of currencies and markets, gold, the S&P 500, all sorts of different markets, and I kind of highlight my thoughts in terms of technical analysis. And I've been doing this for the last couple of weeks. You guys seem to really enjoy it. Let me just, before we get too far into the video, down below you can actually see all the different markets that I am going to be covering here in this video. So if you want to, if you don't have time or you have a busy day today, you can skip anywhere in the video to watch any market that you want to see. For example, if you want to see oil or EURGBP, just skip ahead in the video until you see it highlighted, just like you see this highlighted here. Next, another thing to clarify, if you're not familiar with MetaTrader 4, here is your time frame up above. So you can see right now I'm looking at the 1 hour chart. If I were to skip it to the 1 day, it would look different, right? So you can see what time frame I'm on as well as what chart I'm on down at the bottom. So hope that helps. Guys, before we get too far into it, one more thing before we jump into the analysis. Do me a favor, like the video down below if you like these sort of Sunday specials or Sunday market analysis so that I know to do them more often in the future. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into it. So the first one is going to be Euro USD. Euro dollar actually ended out the week really weird because we had like one of these weeks where we started to see some heavy sell pressure towards the start of the week. And then price just decided to snap right back there towards the end of the week, continuing our concept here on euro dollar of being a super range bound market. If you've been trying to trend trade this, then it's a struggle because this thing has been going back and forth. It just seems to not really want to take a decisive direction yet. And that's okay. We can still wait for opportunities. In the meantime, you can see in this range bound market, we have some levels that we can at least think about. So for example, what I mean by that is we've had this level here, which keeps holding as a supportive level. So price came down and showed very strong support, strong strength in this area a couple different times actually now. So check this out. So in this scenario, you can see that we actually had a bullish engulfing candle explode up and push price right back up back on around the 8th of September. Price came down to this level, which had previously held as support, and then we really shot right off of that. Well, basically, history repeated itself when we came back down once again and saw super strength from the bulls as price shot right back up again. Now, what does this tell us for a potential direction next? Well, it doesn't really tell us much at all, and that's the thing. When it comes to Euro USD, we have been in this range-bound market for a few weeks now. We've just been back and forth on this 4-hour chart. Now, what I want to say with that is that although some markets can stay in range-bound mode for a while, they will break out at some point. And so keeping an eye out for the key breaks here are really some interesting things to think about. So let me highlight one more level that has my attention right now, which is going to be this previous top, of course, right here on euro dollar. This was our topping point for the recent price action right around that 1.2 level. We topped out there and then started to come back down. Have not seen those highs for a while now. So there's a couple different scenarios that going into this week I will personally be looking for on euro dollar, and those scenarios being, okay, we are in this range bound market, but we know that at some point that will change. At some point we will see the market start to trend a direction. We don't know exactly which way, but let's talk about the scenarios either direction. If price decides to get bullish here coming into the new week and we see markets spiking up, there might be room to run into a nice little scenario where we see this guy pop up, which if you are familiar with the break and retest concept, it's a very simple idea. We take significant levels of support or resistance, and we look for them to get denied or broken, and then we look to enter on the retest. Okay, so that could be something that is in play here for this week. Something to think about is if we break up through this key level that rejected twice in the previous week pretty strongly. If that gets broken, if we see strong continuation there, might be worth looking at some long opportunities. Let me give you one trade scenario that I personally like on the long side of Euro USD. It would probably be an idea of, okay, we break through that, we see some strength, we get long right here, right? Looking to buy this market with something like a stop just here. And I'll talk about that in just a second. So stop loss down here and maybe a target at that previous high. This roughly, let's just do a really rough estimate, roughly gives us about 100 pips of profit and about 60 or so pips of stop. So that's our risk, right? So we're risking 60 to make 100. Not the best risk reward. I guess you could tighten the stop up a little bit more if you wanted to. But my idea here is basically you're trying to ride off that momentum and see if you can catch a good 2-to-1 trade off there just off of the retest. Could be a decent, promising trade. Now, this is not me telling you that's what you should do and you should just 100% go in all in on that. There's a lot of new traders out there. I don't want to encourage anybody to copy other people. This is purely my own analysis, and that is why I'm sharing this. You should make your own trading decisions. Do not go around copying people. It's a losing strategy because you don't know why they're doing what they're doing. Rather, we can talk about the understanding about why that might be a decent trade to think about, and then you can go look and confirm things for yourself. Look for confirmation, right? What if you like to see something like this, something like a nice little, what is that? It's a pin bar, right? So if price were to move up, come back down and show that strength, right? That might be the confirmation to look for longs. So you might have to reevaluate as you go along, but that's the first scenario that I'm looking at for euro dollar this week. Let's talk about another one. If price were to come down, right, and break through that structure, I think we have plenty of room to run lower here on euro dollar. Real quick, we can zoom out. You can see we have been traveling up for a long time. We've been ranging for a very long time. And so it is very possible that if we start to see that break underneath, we could be in for a nice little lower low, right? Pushing lower. And with that said, here's the scenario that I like there. Same concept, looking for that retest, looking to potentially sell into this market if we were to see strength from the bears, right? And then we could put stops in a similar way, right? Put stops a decent way away. We're looking for that momentum to carry on. And in that case, personally, I would trail my stops lower. That would be how I trade that one. Because I guess you could make the argument for this area here as a pretty significant support level, right? But I don't think that there's not as much reward unless you're really trying to day trade. There's really not a lot of room here. So if we were to retest here, right, that's only like 50, 60, maybe 70 pips there. That's not a huge risk reward potential there in terms of like a swing trade. So for me, that would not be as good of an opportunity as trailing my stops. Because if we were to see the collapse, right, if we were to see a really big drop and trend start to go the other direction, I'd probably just rather trail that stop and let it move. So that's how I would trade it if we see the break to the downside there on euro dollar. So let's move on to the next one, pound dollar here. Spent some time there on euro dollar. Let's think about the daily chart for a moment here, and then we'll move on to maybe the 4-hour chart going into this week. So let's get our support, get our structure going. So we've got some simple concepts here. This level held beautifully. We'd never made it down to the 200 period moving average. We came very close. Last week I thought we were going to tag that, but we came just shy of it. We didn't quite make it down to that 200-day moving average. Regardless, we did hold this strong level of support pretty well, right? This zone held as a strong supportive structure level, and I think that there's a pretty good chance that the trend is still in favor of the bulls, right? We have this trend line that we've been talking about for a while, right? It depends how you draw it. We've got this one as well, which seems to have held very nicely, right? So you've got a couple different supportive trend line structures from the bulls. We've also got a lot of fundamental arguments for a weaker dollar, right? They're printing a lot of money out there, and so that can inflate the dollar, which causes the US dollar to go. Let's actually do this for a second. I like to visualize it. GBPUSD, right? If they're printing a lot of US dollars, what that does is it devalues the US dollar, right? Because they're printing more of it. That causes potentially the pound to go up. And so that's a lot of why I guess people would argue that the fundamental rise here on the pound makes sense, because we've got a lot of US dollar printing. And so there's a good chance that people could be buying the pound in favor of that. That's also because the pound is a more risky investment in terms of a currency rather than the US dollar, right? So recently we've had a lot of positive news. We've had a lot of bullishness across markets. And so a lot of times what happens is they take money out of the US dollar and they put it into something like the pound, because the pound is a riskier investment than something like the US dollar, right? In a lot of cases. So makes kind of fundamental sense, and we can talk about how in the technicals we can kind of see that reflecting. So looking for opportunities on this pullback, to me, I like that. I like the idea of getting long somewhere somewhere on the pound. So with that said, let's talk about a sample on the pound. So for me, I still like the idea of buying this 200-day. If we do see a little bit more downtrend, I would be looking personally to be long on the pound. I like that idea. And if that was to be the case, you've got some interesting levels to think about. I think that your previous high could be a pretty good target. And then stops under this structure here, probably somewhere around here, would be a decent area in my view. And then I guess if you're putting hard targets, something like up here could be pretty good. I think that gives you probably about a 2-to-1 risk to reward. So long for 630 pips, pretty decent size swing, risking about 260. So pretty decent in my view there. So that's what I see there on the pound in terms of a longer term, bullish pullback scenario. We can also talk about the 4-hour chart, see if there's anything super significant here. You can see, so short term, right? If we were to go tag that, let's see if I can get a rectangle. If we were to go tag that 200-day moving average, we would probably want to see this level hold short term, right? And get us down just a bit lower. The 200-day moving average ends up being around here, which lines up nicely with our demand zone. So could be an interesting thing to think about there. I like that bullish opportunity. Of course, as always, not telling you what you should do. I'm telling you what my analysis is telling me. Again, there's a lot of people out there who are newer to this stuff, and they hear somebody say something like this and they say, oh, I got to go all in because this person knows what they're doing. And just because you know what you're doing in trading does not mean you're right every single time. So you should know that, and you should be aware of that so that you don't get caught up just trying to copy people or playing that game, because a lot of people lose a lot of money trying to do that. So don't do that. Dollar yen. Let's talk about USDJPY for a moment here. You can see the downtrend here is really in play as the dollar has been weakening quite a bit. We've got some key trend line levels that we can talk about. A pullback to this to me is a pretty good sell opportunity in my opinion. We are at a level of support right now. So you can see we've got this level of support where basically buyers previously held this level very well. We have returned back to that level, and the question now becomes, is that going to hold as a buyer level again? Well, for me, there's really two scenarios. Both of them are actually looking for a sell. In this case, if we were to see a break underneath, looking for that retest to me gives a pretty good opportunity. I like that opportunity. So looking for sells underneath here, I'd probably put stops, above structure somewhere and let that trailing stop run. That's how I would approach that. Or the other scenario is if we were to get a bullish rise here, right? Looking for the sell on the pullback to this trend line to me looks pretty nice as well. And let me offer one more scenario. So if I'm wrong about both of those and we do see a really strong bullish rise on the dollar, that could cause the USDJPY pair to actually break through this level. In that case, one of my favorite trades, beautiful, beautiful opportunity, I think, is a retest to this trend line level, broken, right? And looking for the continuation up to the good old 200-day moving average. So a long-term value that I'm constantly watching on my charts. So with that said, that is probably actually one of my favorite scenarios would be to see that get broken, to see that bullish trend pick up. But we are not there yet, and so for the time being, looking for breakouts or seeing if we can catch some of the momentum to the downside. But if that changes, again, one of my favorite setups would be buying into that on a retest, looking to target something like that 200-day moving average, wherever that would be at the time. Okay. So that's my personal favorite setup there on USDJPY. Let's move on to gold. Gold had an interesting week, very, very choppy recently. Not a ton of decisive direction here. I think that the big things to think about here on gold are just watching the break of these key levels here, right? So that's pretty much all I'm watching on gold would be a break underneath, retest, go, right? Same concept on the top. In this case, we've got some levels that we could talk about on the top, right? You've of course got the highs. You've got on the low side, you've got this kind of wick down here just to consider, just to think about. That could be a supportive level. But really, there's not so much support in sight for gold until you get down to levels like this. So I would be personally careful if you are a bull. Watch out for that break to the downside, because if we see that happen, right, if we get a strong dollar like we just talked about, it could send gold lower, and really there's not a ton of technical support until you get down to that 200-day moving average right around this area of support back here. So I think that if price breaks lower, I would actually be interested in looking for short-term sells to ride that momentum to the downside. Now, on the flip side, of course, if we do decide to continue our uptrend and break through this level, looking for the retest, I think there's some great opportunities to just trade that back to the highs, and that's probably what I would do if I saw this market start to pick up and give me a retest opportunity. So yeah. US oil is our next one. Let's take a look here at the daily chart. You can see daily chart, we had an incredible drop on oil and followed by a really incredible rally back. Now what was this high made? This was back in the beginning of 2020. So the stock market has corrected itself way more than oil. So oil's still made a good recovery, but not nearly as much. We've lost so much off of oil's value. It is rising back. And now things are at an interesting point because we are just barely above the 200-day moving average. And you know, honestly, there's not like a super decisive direction here for me, right? The trend super long-term is down. The trend kind of long-term is up. So we have this kind of mixed place. We have seen price, you know, honestly, the big thing for me would be to watch where price goes in the next few weeks. If we move decisively one direction, right? If we were to move up and break through this 200-day pretty strongly, right? If we were to get above that, then maybe looking for bullish opportunities could actually be a pretty good scenario. Same thing could happen on the flip side. Honestly, though, we could see a dip back down and things could start to trail lower, right? And that might be opportunities to look for pullbacks and breakouts in that direction. So for me, like right now, there's not like a, oh, you buy right here, oh, you sell right here. For me, it's waiting for a pretty clear, decisive trend to start picking up and trying to find pullbacks and opportunities, breakouts, that sort of thing. Let's move on to another one, SPX 500 here. So we had a pretty ugly week in the stock market. We had the S&P drop pretty significantly. Here on the 4-hour chart, you can see we do happen to be putting in a low here recently, though, that seems to want to have a hard time breaking. We'll see if that can break this week. We entered into a consolidation zone towards the end of the week. Right, you can see just back and forth here on S&P 500, just back and forth, not really breaking out either direction. I would watch the break on this big time coming into this week. I think that if we were to break underneath this, that could be huge because that, to me, almost, I would say a very strong likelihood sends us back to the 200-day moving average. So if we were to see, let's use our imaginations here. If we were to see something like this, a nice red candle there, right? That to me is probably going to lead us into retesting that 200-day moving average. On the stock market, the 200-day moving average seems to be such a heavily watched vessel because you can see so many times in history where everybody on the news, right, even they talk about the golden cross. They talk about the death cross, which is basically just like moving average crossovers on the long-term indices and how historically a lot of times they actually signal downturns, right? So watching for that is going to be huge. A lot of times, you know, the 200-day moving average can act as a dynamic level of support or value, right? So a lot of times watching for that could be in play. So if we see this market break lower, I think there's a great chance that we are going back to the 200-day moving average. That leads us down to areas like 3,100. So I think it's possible if we start to see some signals, if we start to see some strength to the downside. Until then, we are just in a range-bound market, and the opposite could easily happen as well. If you've been watching the S&P, a lot of times these dips just get bought up right away. So if we were to see something like this, then the opposite applies, right? That momentum starts picking up and probably very good chance we just make our way back to the highs. So for me, watching these two zones is going to be the biggest key. Watching the supply and demand zones and seeing one break could lead us to pick up momentum to either the highs or, in my other case, back to the 200-day moving average. That's my biggest opinion right there on the S&P 500 for going into this week. I think there's trades more short-term either direction. EURGBP, let's talk about this one for a moment. Had a really good rise there for the week. We pulled back, found support, and then we kind of ended the week just kind of in this random middle spot. There are some levels to think about here on EURGBP if you watch it, right? We do have this level here, which very ugly, but did hold pretty well on this level. Might see it actually better on the daily chart. Yeah, you can see it really clean on the daily chart there. We formed this high, right? Price broke through, price retested, and held. I think there's a pretty good chance we probably make our way higher there, especially when we talked about, you know, the Euro USD and the pound dollar specifically. You can go back in the video if you want to see those. So might be interesting to see if that one can continue higher. What that assumes is that basically we looked at the euro and the pound. That would basically be saying that we think that the euro is going to go up more than the pound. So we'll see what happens with that. Should be interesting to watch going into the week. We did get a very, very strong hold there. So I think from a technical perspective, definitely is looking bullish for the time being. Let's take a look at pound yen and see what we can find here. Pound yen had an awful week. We had sold off super hard, broke through a lot of structure all in a very short period of time, right? Price was pulling back to this trend line and just collapsed underneath it. I'd say it's still bullish from here because we did even consolidate and look at this very weak attempt to buy back just to dump towards the end of the week. I think it has more room to run to the downside there. In fact, in this scenario, I wish I was short on the break. I wish I had seen that trade because that's beautiful. I think that there is definitely room to run here. If I were in this position, how I would personally handle it is I'd be trailing stops. I'd probably have a stop at this point. If I had shorted, let's just say, for example, if I had shorted here under the momentum, I would have probably had initial stops here. At this point, I would have trailed stops up to break even and see how this trade would have gone for the rest of the week, right? If price moves lower, I would just be continuing to trail stops underneath or above structure in this case because we are short. So that's just all I see there on pound yen. Really nothing too much. We do have support to think about if we head down to this level at that 131.89. Could be something to pay attention to. Let's take a look at Aussie dollar while we're at this and see what we can find here. Aussie dollar continues its upward trend, and there's actually a trend line here that we can draw, but there's also this 20 period moving average, which is, you know, been holding beautifully, right? So buyers are just holding this area every time it dips, and so until that fails, I think the game is being a bull. But if that fails, we want to be right out of the way, because when that fails, I bet you we probably see a pretty strong dip back the other way. A lot of times that's what happens when you see these chugging trends, is when they end violently very quickly, and all of a sudden we're just selling off big. So that's something to think about, to keep an eye on Aussie dollar. In fact, I actually like the idea now of, instead of, you know, buying and buying and buying up here at what seems to be a pretty extended upward level, right? We see, if we back out, you can see we've been going up for many months, and at some point I think that will probably take a pause here. So as we do extend further up, if we were to see a strong break below this, I'd say that the momentum could actually pick up sell side pretty easily, and looking for a similar scenario to that SPX 500 where we are looking for a move back to the 200-day moving average could be worth thinking about on AUDUSD. So keeping an eye on that. Same story, I'm sure, on New Zealand dollar. These two move quite a bit the same. You can see a lot of overall momentum to the upside. When that starts to shift, there may be room to look for the counter trend, or at least for the new direction to the downside. So definitely something to think about there as well. Last one is going to be USDCAD. You can see USDCAD overall very strong to the downside here. Not too much to say here. I think that this chart is really weird because we went really low, really high, really low. So right now, this chart tends to just be respecting trends quite a bit. So for me, on something like the 4-hour chart, actually really quick on the daily, we do see this momentum kind of shifting directions a little bit. If we were to see a little bit more bullishness, I think there might be room to look to try and get long, to try and ride a new direction. Because again, when we shifted directions back in, I believe that was March or April. Yeah. January, February, March. So March, we shifted directions and started going short side. If something like that happens again, very well could be that this sort of market environment where it's trendy could start trending the other direction again. And if that starts to happen, I think there might be opportunities to look to be long in that scenario. So that's just my personal opinion there on USD CAD. Guys, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like. Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you are new. If you want to trade with myself and the rest of our team and see any trades that I actually take, you can follow along and see the trades that I am taking inside of the premium service that I offer, the A1 trading community. Myself and the rest of our analysts are in there sharing tips, tricks, and our own personal trades for other people to see as information and yeah, all that good stuff. So check us out if you haven't already. There's a link down below in the description and a discount code for you if you are interested in joining us. If you got something out of it, again, make sure to smash that like. Thanks so much for watching, and we will see you back next time.